Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the Shadow of the Wachtturm, a 7th Sea First Edition Let's Play set in the great lawless city of Freeburg. Our art is courtesy of Hero Forge, First Edition 7th Sea, and Be Funky. Our producer is the wise, hilarious, and creative steward of Dirty 20 Gaming, Kevin, and our lore master for the series is the beautiful and benevolent Syndra. Before we get started, I wanted to give a content warning. While the spirit of the Seven Sea is swashbuckling adventure and shadowy intrigue, the story will deal with mature themes, including death, loss, suicide, and grief. Eisen, our setting, is recovering from a 30-year civil war over religious differences. It may get dark sometimes, and there's no shame in bowing out, but it's not a place your head can go at the moment. So, without further ado, I'm going to have our savvy swashbucklers introduce themselves. Rory, would you like to go first?
Oh, yeah, sure. Why not? Well, yeah, hello. My name is Rory. I'm playing a fine man named Hans tonight. Not gonna give you too many more details on him. He's pretty cool, though. Outside of the fine assembly that is Dirty 20 Gaming, I tend to work on music. Not as much as of late, unfortunately. And I got a new job recently. That's exciting. I'm hoping to be able to actually have something new to post about next session. So keep an eye out for that, I suppose. And I believe that's it.
Well, thank you, and look forward to hearing about it next week. And Shadow, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself for us?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Shadow, also known as the True Shadowmancer. For this Seventh Seas campaign, I will be playing Gerald Saint-Germain Dupont, a swordsman and escort to Milady. You can also find me on when we are up and around again on the Cyberpunk Red game, playing Shane the Nomad. And for right now, I'm kind of freewheeling things, so we'll see how things go.
All right, thank you. And Sans, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, now that I have my links up. Um Yes, hello y'all. My name is Sarah. You can find me over on Tangor Productions working with the Scarred Adventurer on things and stuff that are coming eventually. Creative endeavors take time, y'all. Other than that, you can find me we do have 2 more shows of the Dawson Riddle left. On November 9th, we are coming back for 2 days. Or for 2 shows. One at 2 and one at 8. And after that, the Dawson Riddle might go away for a very long time. I don't know. If you want to see me do more stuff here, I am here a lot. I am here when the Tuesday game comes back as our lovable Corpo Magic. I am the DM for the Thursday Fool's Gold campaign called King's Pirate. And I am also here on the Saturday game of Thirsty Seas as Captain Big Al.
In other words, she lives here.
Basically.
All right. And I just realized I forgot to ask what handle you prefer.
Either or.
Whether I was actually meaning for Tooth.
I don't mind either. Like, it's fine.
Okay.
It doesn't matter.
I'll just go with Tooth then, since I'm trying to remember to keep everybody's identities their own to reveal or not. If you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ruth. It's just spelled a little differently with a different first letter. So it's just easier to say Ruth. Hi.
Is there anything you want to tell us about what you're involved in? Or you want to pin it for next week?
I'm here sometimes. Today as Runa. Tuesdays when we're back as our fixer exit. And I will be back on Thursdays finally as Desrai, our badass tiefling barbarian. And that's about it, I think.
Well, I am going to switch us over from the map that we are currently on. I don't know if the audience can see, but we're currently on a map of Thea itself. In the nation of Eisen, and we are going to move in a little bit closer to the city of Freiburg itself, where everyone is going to currently find themselves, whether they know it or not. So, in the ancient days of Numa, the great storyteller and philosopher Ceres the Wiser once noted that an adventure can only begin in one of three ways: by death, by slur, or by letter. To begin without any one of these incitements is folly, a tobacco best described as an indiscretion, a dalliance, or an escapade. But fear not, we begin tonight properly girded with a death, the most inescapable of the three, and thus the most powerful. Rory, take your pick. Is Hans at a church, or is he at a bar?
He's at a bar, 100%.
The bar that he has found himself at is not far from where he emerged into the city of Freiburg. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But it's a particularly strange bar because it is on its outside a church. It was previously a church of the objectionist faith, until the priest involved made some enemies that he couldn't afford to make. It was since purchased by a barman who has kept the exterior facade and renamed the place the Cup of St. Gregor. Anyone who wishes to have a drink needs only go into the confessional and order it, and holy men who come into the place trying to spread their faith get to have a baptism in one of the rain barrels that's outside. It is not a place for men of great faith. And in fact, the Inquisition considers its very existence to be somewhat heretical. The problem is it's one of the best places for Eisen mercenaries to find work, so they're not often inclined to cause much trouble there.
Very fair.
Hans has been in Freiburg for a few nights. He only arrived here after some unexpected events. And as his mind kind of drifts back, it drifts back to the cause. You know, he was a young man. He'd been given a commission to fight in the army of his lord. And he'd sought out to go do so. He had his family's Draconeisen sword in Panzerhand. You know, it was like the finest thing that he could do. He's going to be defending his faith. He had his lord's backing. Lord Hilgrund, who is in the center of Eisen, you know, their motto is that the center must hold. And they had a ferocious military heritage, but they were going up against one Fauner Posen, who is in the north, who is a legend amongst the Eisen, and was even at the time. She took command of her nation at the age of 10, or of her people. She was a devout Vadisine. And Hilgrund himself was also a Vadisine, but there are sometimes smaller conflicts that play out within larger lists. Hilgrund was quite simply the strongest Iron Prince outside of Posen herself. And he intended to make sure that she would not bully him. And he intended to do that with a show of force that would impress even Fauner Posen. Fauner Posen is no longer a 10-year-old. She's 25. She's mastered 5 different swordsman schools, and she's a master strategist. She is not known for her kindness. And there's good reason to not want to be viewed as bullyable by her. You made fast friends with a young man within the ranks. You know, you're an officer, and there's no like fraternizing with soldiers, but every soldier needs a good sergeant. They don't get very far. Otto was happy to try to assure you that, you know, the battle was going to go in your favor, that Heelgren was a great commander. Never mind that in the last confrontation with von Posen, the person who held your commission took a crossbow bolt to the throat. That's the nature of war.
Indeed it is.
So, you know, the night goes late. The big battle is coming the next day. It's your first real battle. You know, you've gone through academy, you've done battles, you've done duels. You know, you are as equipped as Eisen can make you for your first taste of battle. So I'm not actually going to play out the entire battle, but I do want to know when a battle starts, how it functions is that heroes like yourself get to choose a position within it. They get to be heavily engaged in the reserves, or sorry, disengaged or in the reserves. And that each of those has different advantages. In heavily engaged, you're most likely to take the most wounds, but you'll contribute the most to your leader's potential success. Does that make sense? You'll effectively give them a bonus on their roll.
Okay.
In the reserves, it's just the opposite. You're not likely to take many wounds, but there's very little that you can contribute. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say heavily engaged. He's right up there. He's a sergeant, of course, but I mean that makes him no less of a fighter than the soldiers he's leading. So I'd say he's right up there leading the charge.
All right. So I would like to, two things from you. When you are heavily engaged, you do not have like an active defense roll that you make. You just take a certain number of wounds, and you either like bear through it or you don't.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So the first thing I want is I want a brawn roll. I want you to tell me how many flesh wounds you take during the first course of like the round of this fighting. Does that make sense?
Okay. First roll. I'm going to need a bit of help figuring out the dice numbers for this for the first roll.
Sure. So this is just a flat roll of the trait. So you should be able to just hit your brawn itself for this, because that's what you roll.
The buttons should work for these ones.
Yeah.
I heard something.
Yes. So it looks like you rolled a 25. So now let me explain a bit how the mechanics of injury work. Okay.
Wait a moment. I believe that was the test roll from before.
Oh.
Yeah, I
yes,
have not gotten a new roll yet.
Okay.
Okay.
So it did not work to just push the brawn button, did it?
I don't believe it did.
Yeah. Okay. So that's not a working function at the moment. So what you're going to do is, because you have a brawn of 4 and you are very mighty, you're just going to do the 4K4 version of the roll that we laid out in the call earlier.
Okay.
Okay, so an 8. Yeah, it's an awful roll.
Oh yeah. Just wanted to make sure I punched in the numbers right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So I would also like you to make a wits and let me just check the skill. You said you had picked up the there it is, the strategist skill.
Yeah.
So go ahead and roll that, and that'll be 3 keep 2.
Okay, so wits and then strategist.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And the last thing that will roll is just a single D10.
And for wits, it's the same function, 2 keep 2 in my case, because I've got 2.
Yes, but you also get an unkept die from your strategy skill.
Okay. 3 keep 2 for wits total, or for that roll total, correct?
Yes.
Okay. New system, everybody. Apologize for all this.
So this is a great example of why the system is so unpredictable, but in a great way. You rolled 4K4, which should have been just an in the hand kind of roll, and got an 8. You know what I'm saying? Then you rolled 3K2, which and got twice the value that you did of the roll that should have been much better. Does that make sense? So like one die can make all the difference. Somebody who's got to keep 1 of something can surprise everybody and succeed at something.
Oh yeah.
So there's some versatility in it, but there's also a certain degree to which skill really does usually trump lack of skill. Does that make
Okay.
sense? So, and then the last thing I'm gonna have you do is just do a roll 1d10. And this
Okay.
die can't explode. And you'll add 1 to the result.
Just 1d10 plus 1.
Yep.
Right. Got a 7.
Okay. So, you are taking 20 points of damage from just being this heavily engaged. The 8
Okay.
that you got soaks 8 of that 20, but it's not enough to soak the entire thing. So what that translates to is a single dramatic wound.
Okay.
Okay. And largely I'm doing this right here because it just sort of explains how the injury mechanic works.
Yeah.
You have a number of dramatic wounds equal to your resolve times 2. So you've taken 1 out of the 6 that you potentially have. But after you have 3, you're crippled. And you got a 16 on the strategy roll itself. And what that is kind of assessing your perspective of the best way that you can use your unit to counter what Posen is doing. Posen is doing is like a large strategy. Does that make sense? So the 16 gives you a respect for, you've heard of the school strategy that she employs. It's called Una Buen Bar. And what it's noteworthy for is that it teaches a commander not to fear the loss of individual units, and instead to see everything as an opportunity that can be exploited, even the death of your own men. It is a ruthless and in many ways kind of cruel school, but it's also extraordinarily effective from a strategic sense because it's very hard for traditional commanders to get over their attachment to their units, their men, the people that they've grown with. And she's a master of it, so she's devastatingly effective. And the Posen has more troops, and she's a better commander than Heelblunt. So any advantage that he may be able to gain, the only chance that he has of really pulling out the battle is that for the heroes on his side to kind of like go up and over the top to change the course of things. When you rolled the 7, that is for a heroic opportunity. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So that can be something like picking up a banner or, charging into a duel. For the purposes of our story tonight, what that opportunity is an opportunity to take a shot at Posen herself while she's commanding. She's on horseback. She's wearing a full Draconized suit. The target number to hit her with a thrown weapon is a 40.
Oh, okay.
However, even a successful hit will still distract her during the course of the combat. Does that make sense? And provide a slight advantage. Nothing like a little reminder of their mortality to make a commander focus down to like the immediate moment. So I'm assuming that you're going to have access to javelins, pistols, rifles, all of those things are being used by the men like under your command, and you can easily snatch one up. I don't believe you have any marksman skill, but you can still make the finesse roll to do so.
Okay. Without the skill. So yeah, just raw finesse roll?
Yes.
Gotcha. 11.
All right. So the shot goes far wide, but we're kind of switching out of like rolled combat to like narrative combat at this point, because the shot also brings you to the attention of Fawn or Posen. The memories as Hans is kind of, like remembering this, the sway of battle around him and the chaos of everything. He kind of remembers taking the shot, and then it seems like Posen looked at him, and then in the next instant, his memory has Posen upon him. Dismounting, saluting with her blade, recognizing the Draconizing of a fellow noble. The first strike of blows, you're fighting an Eisenfoss master who could well have taught your own teacher something.
Oh yeah.
What you've never seen done before, you had seen in practice many times an Eisenfoss master would like snap a blade over their knee or something like that.
Yeah.
You had never seen that done with Draconizing until she does it with your family's sword.
Fuck. Oh.
And
God
that's
damn.
the moment before she like takes her own blade, and she seems to kind of have a look of like almost regret. You know what I'm saying? Like you're young, 18, 19, young nobleman, and regret passes her face, and then she plunges her sword into your heart and moves on. You see
Well-
Otto kind of like rushing to you, you know, things go soundless. Darkness comes over you. 4 years later, we're at a grave surrounding the remains of a battle, one that Hilgren lost decisively to Posen.
Mhm.
2 Eisen gravediggers, busy looking for, you know, some useful loot, are opening up the grave. You know, they've already have a line of them next to them. Your body is lifted. These are not quite exactly memories. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You remember a cart, and you remember like your fist being clutched so tight that they couldn't pry the Panzer hand off of you. You remember hearing them talk about like, well, if we can just get it off, we can pass as nobles, we can give orders, we can be the fancy ones. We won't have to worry about a thing. As they pass into an area of black forest south of Eisen called the Schwarzenwalden. The Black Forest is deep, and no Eisen familiar with the area and native to it will pass into it at night. Nor will any of them chop down the wood to make a fire. And the reason for it is the legends of the Scottenmont. In this forest, there is an ancient darkness. The legends of the Scottenmont and his shears cutting people apart are told in many corners of Eisen. Many people think that it's just an urban legend or just a fairy tale, folk tale. But the peasants huddled around their fire, looking into it, and the way that the logs seem to make the wood glow red instead of the normal ambiance of a fire, they can't help a shiver that goes down their backs. And then, quite suddenly, there's a sound of shears snapping, and limbs fall from them one at a time. They scream, they bleed, and after a few moments next to the cart where your body lies, there are stacks of human limbs piled up like firewood.
Whoa.
And great claws push into the wood on either side of your body. And then one of them lifts up, and you realize that, and though dead and yet aware of this moment because of your coming resurrection, you can see that there are no shears, there are no metal, there are just like the sides of hands that are built like pairs of scissors on either side. And he plunges one of those blades straight into your heart. And you feel it quicken again, your skin regains pallor, your flesh regrows in a moment, and you are drawing breath and staring into eyes that are pools of shadow.
Absolutely stunned. I don't even know if 4 years is quite a long time. You may have slightly forgotten how to speak.
He says, "Find your tongue. I have a riddle for you, Eisen."
Hey. Oh, my God. You have a riddle.
Just kind of like like the blades land on either side of your neck on the cart.
What is this? What are you doing?
He says, "I have a riddle for you. It goes like this." He says, "Who owes me a favor?"
Judging from the large blades on either side of my neck, I would assume I owe you a favor now.
You're a bright one.
Oh, God.
He says,
What favor might that be?
he says, "It will come due when it is time."
Of course.
He pulls the blades out, and he says, "And so you don't forget." And the blade of like his hand reaches down and taps the Draconeisen Panzer hand. Draconeisen is pure white steel. It usually weighs about a fifth of what regular steel does. You see yours turn black at its touch.
Whoa.
You've never seen anything like that. You've never seen a darkened piece of Draconeisen before, ever. He steps back and he says, "There is a coming battle." He says, "I will need a soldier." He says, "A leader." He says, "One that performed better than you did before."
I mean, I can make no promises, but I can. How much time do we have?
Says, "That has to be seen." He says, "There are many battles coming." He says, "Many opportunities." He says, "One more important than any other." He says, "Tell no one of this conversation."
Don't think anyone would believe me even if I did. So
He takes a step back and you see the claw moves up to like one of the great blackened trees that like fill this forest. Their wood is notorious. Blackwood is like in some places the very foolish like prize it. You know what I'm saying?
Oh.
Of like, oh look, it's extremely rare.
oh, it's so cool.
Most-
Yeah.
Most people in Eisen are like, yeah, keep that away from me.
Yeah.
He draws his like bladed hand down the tree. And you see it sort of split open and there's a portal that looks like ink.
I guess it's not the strangest thing I've seen in the last 2 minutes.
He says, "We'll speak again." He says, "You have to sleep sometime."
Sleep when I'm dead. Huh?
There's just a very strange, coarse laughter, like wind shaking dead branches.
Oh.
And he just gestures to the portal.
Yes, as you command, Captain.
Screams reach you as you step through it. Like
Ooh.
you come out and you are in the middle of an orphanage on the upper floor, and you've just stepped out of the wardrobe of a cabinet. And you kind of look back and you see that the wood of the wardrobe behind you is black wood, and there are 50 children that are
Thomas.
absolutely terrified, pushed up against like the walls of the orphanage, like doing their best to like cover themselves with their blankets.
Oh. I'm very sorry, children. I would say I did not mean to scare you, but I don't even know what's happening.
And one of the children is like, "Are you going to eat this?"
No. I'd much prefer a sandwich.
There's a girl that just starts crying. She's like, "I had a sandwich for lunch."
If you could just show me where to get a bit of food, that would be wonderful. And you like look back.
Yeah, and one of like the
Bring
braver
this
kids.
posture a bit. Now let this be a lesson to you, children. Do not touch the black wood of the forest. It's dangerous. Do not use it. Do not prize it. It's a fool's errand to seek after this accursed wood.
And the like, you know, one of the kids kind of like he lights a match and he checks under his bed first, and then he kind of like holds it up and starts moving towards the stairwell, and he's like, "It ate Elsa last week."
It's not the first time it's happened. My God.
And he starts leading the way down a stairwell.
Desperate times.
You're on the third floor of a building with 50 orphans afloor. All of them the remnants of the War of the Cross.
Yeah.
In the days to come, you're going to find out that's a small fraction compared to what are outside. That these are the fortunate ones.
Oof.
You do manage to find some food, and that's kind of like where pull away memories start to sort of go back to the present day. But you're back in the cathedral. Man is there's kind of like a server like staring at you. He's like,
Can I help you?
I asked you if you wanted something to drink.
Oh God, sorry. My head is killing me today. Cold water and something strong. Whatever's convenient.
He kind of points to the rain barrel. He's like, "Are you looking for a prayer?" He says, "The only penances we serve here," he says, "are strong."
Yeah. Well, that's good then. I could use. Suppose I could use penance.
It says herring deck, best thing on the menu for you. Herring deck translates to a gentleman's dinner, is like the literal meaning in Eisen.
Okay.
Which he sets down a beer and a shot.
Yep. All right. Uh, I just think it'd be really funny. Still kind of confused. I'm making this canon for you, Siosa. He takes the shot, dunks it, just picks up, drops it into the big glass of beer, and just back goes the whole thing. Something he learned from a couple of the privates in the military.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to cut away from Hans and move over to Rosa. All right. Rosa is at her little shop in the district of Flucifer. She is right by an area it's called the Marktplatz, the marketplace. And she's been lucky enough to take up shop in a little shop next to a large burly Usuran man who has definitely gotten a crush on her. The Usuran, he runs a trinket shop with many objects that he claims are enchanted. He has asked her over to many times to like see if any of them are actually enchanted, but mostly what he's selling is really good stories that are attached to pieces of junk. And there are frequent buyers for them. Nobles sometimes have more money than sense, many times have more money than sense, and he's a storyteller who's figured out how to turn that into a shop. And it's kind of him that you expect when you hear like a heavy thump on the door. But it's not Todd is the name of the big Usuran. It's not him. Instead, it's an Eisen man that is of obvious noble bearing that you've never seen before. I actually have a picture for him that I'm going to share right now. Don't know if everybody can see that or if it popped up for everyone or just for me.
It popped up for me. I don't know about
Okay.
everyone
I
else.
can
It should have been okay, cool. So he kind of like looks a little bit uncertain. You know, he takes in your clothes and whatnot, but like many people who come to your shop, they and have never had a reading or fortune told before or something, he's clearly a aversion to this.
And how she greets everyone. Signore, ciao, ¿cómo está?
He kind of blinks a little bit and of just like very broken Vidachi. He says, "You are a sightseer."
In Vidachi, because that's the only thing I learned in Italian, y'all.
So everybody's acquainted with Eisen. I give that to everybody for free because it is a game set in Freiburg. So,
Oh, trust me, she knows. And seeing this person come in, sit, signore, sit.
You have heard all morning the tolling of bells. The Draken Cathedral is directly to your west. You haven't heard an explanation as to like what the bells are tolling. Normally they just toll the hour, but they've been sort of continually tolling throughout the day. And he's sort of, you know, he has a book in one hand and he comes in and he sits and he's kind of like squeezing both sides of it. Eisen are not men that wear their emotions on their faces. Like there is very much a culture of stoicism, and this man looks like he's just a cup boiling over. Does that make sense? Like he's barely keeping any kind of composure at all. Says, I would like to know what the future holds.
Si, signore. You have gold?
Oh, yes. He just kind of like sets a bag on it. And like you've seen some nobles who have enough money that money is not a major concern. With him, it's like you can't quite tell if it's like he's so rich that he doesn't think about it, or he's just so not in a place where he can think about commerce that he can really bear to like do something as menial as like counting. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes. She shuffles her cards. A couple fall out, like they literally just did on my desk. And they just keep coming out. And so first three that comes out, she kind of takes them and she flips them over for him. Signore, the death, signore. I do not know.
The moment you like kind of show it to him and he sees the word death, you see him just kind of like he just breaks. Like it's in many ways it's kind of harder to watch like a man sob when you're from a culture of like very dominant patriarchy. Does that make sense? You see, he kind of like sets the book down. He just buries his face in his hands. He just like, I don't know how there can be a future.
Well, signore, the guards, and the next one that literally fell out was the devil.
He kind of like looks at it and he's like, it's actually the Legion in this. It's one
Yep.
of the small differences in the world, but like, he's like, he kind of looks at it and that card like makes him give like a very kind of absurd laugh.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, he would find that hilarious.
But signore, light, the
That's lovers, I'm assuming.
yep, the last one is lovers.
By the way, your cards are fucking on point. Just like, I just want to let you know for like where this is at.
Oh no, like I just did that randomly. I let the other two fall.
It's like, I don't. And he just kind of like, you know, the book that he has in his hands is like leather bound. It doesn't have like a hard stiff, and so he just kind of like squeezes it again. Your character is not literate, but you're familiar with numbers, and there is like an 18 on the side of it. You're not sure what exactly that means, but he just sort of like takes a deep breath and he's like, I don't. He says that can't be a future.
Light always comes in the darkest of times.
Don't see how.
And she kind of goes to like touch his hand, and then you can see her absolutely pull it back. Days at a time. Days at a time.
Says, how am I supposed to take it? He says, is it advice? Is it what I'm supposed to do? He says, what does it mean?
Signore, it's not my first language, and I don't know how to explain better.
He kind of, he says, a man that I cherish, he says, he's gone. He says, he left me with something, he says, it seems impossible. He says, a responsibility, he says, I am in no way, he says, prepared for. He says, and moreover, he says, he was everything to me. He was my mentor. He was the man that I cared for. It says, I would have given my life for his if he had asked. He says, but he did not ask.
You. Life is a journey. And sometimes the journey looks like it has reached a lake. But that is only how you are seeing it. Sometimes a lake is not a lake, but a lock. And if you look around, you may find a better way.
Huh. He kind of studies the cards that are on the table. He says, tell me what they mean again.
Death is not always a ending. It is sometimes a change. While Legion may be a deal that you are not ready for. And the lovers, of course, normally do mean a brighter end.
He says, could it be, he says, that it wants me to honor something that I loved?
Si, signore.
He kind of like, he nods and he's like, I don't know if I can do that. He says, but I think I could try.
That is your first step, signore.
Um, he says, if you'll pardon me, he says, I have a funeral to get to.
Si, signore.
He's like, I apologize. He says, this is not the original reason, he says, that I came. He says, I was asked, he says, to bring you something. And he reaches into his coat and he draws out, like it's just a little envelope. And he sets it down. There's a seal on it that has the like official seal of Freiburg, which is like a tower and a man standing in its shadow. Like you recognize it literally from some banners. You've never actually gotten correspondence with it before.
Yeah.
And he kind of he says, "Are you? You work here, so if I have questions, I could come here again."
Si, signore.
And he kind of pushes the door open and steps out. There's 100 guilder in the bag. He set down. Like your normal rates for a reading are probably like 2 or 3 if you think they're loaded.
Okay.
Because 2 or 3 guilder is like in a normal city, it's like a room in like a fairly nice inn for a night. Does that make sense? Freiburg is all screwed up. Like the most expensive inn room here is like 15 guilder for a night, and that's for like a nobles only, super reclusive, like built on the back of a dragon's spine inn. Yeah, so like
Oh. Yeah. As soon as that door closes and he is like gone, she takes it out and just, all right then, I guess I'm safe for a little bit. And puts it away in her chest.
opening the letter.
Yes.
All right. So there's both a letter in and of itself, which has like a drawing on it, but there's something else that is folded around, which is something that you have not seen since you were 10 years old. Before you were adopted into your first family, you were brought to Freiburg. You were hidden in a basement of a building that you knew nothing about. It's kind of part of the reason you've come back to Freiburg as opposed to anywhere else. And the woman who had taken you told you that the ornament that you used to keep your hair up, which was like a little silken spider web, which kind of kept your hair back and also provided you a veil to cover your eyes. She told you that you couldn't bring it with you because it would mark you as a stray cat, and that you needed to hide that in order to escape Fidachi. It was like probably one of your favorite little pieces of jewelry at the time. You know what I'm saying? You still have a spider. You know, you would probably never be persuaded to give up.
Yeah.
But the reminder of it, the trappings of like your life in Vidachi, you haven't seen since. That same veil fitted for a child, and like the hairpiece is inside of the envelope.
All right.
Along with the drawing that's on the letter is of a building here in Flucifer that you know.
Yep, I'm packing up my shop for the day. My cards are coming with me. I am putting up the sign of like I am closed. I am headed to this place. Like
I was like, where are you going? There's a funeral. Everybody's here in the marketplace.
to whoever it
I'd
was,
love to watch her leave.
to Todd, family, si, signore, Todd.
He says, a family of a beautiful Rosa. Do you need an escort? Maybe I
No,
can be
no,
introduced to some of her
no.
siblings.
Family very quiet, signore.
That I have not been accused of. Says, all right, I'll make sure none of the local hoodlums mess with your shop.
Grazie, signore.
Yeah. So you head out. The building is like it's nearby and it's been abandoned for years, which is saying something in a city where real estate is incredibly valuable. At one time it was a slaughterhouse. And it still kind of has the smell of it, and the smell of it is the reason that nobody has come to like claim it or buy it or anything like that. And the smell still kind of hits you, and like you remember it from your childhood. Remember kind of like covering your face with a kerchief most of the time that you were here. You were here for a few days. They had to keep you hidden. Transport had to be arranged elsewhere. You remember the women that took you, that kind of like, you know, you'd seen your family burn. Well, I mean, you hadn't seen it, but you knew that they were. And she'd done her best to kind of like hold you, but she was definitely a no Vidachi woman. You know what I'm saying? Like she was much more the type of like, here's a pat. You know, like, are you okay? Oh, you need more. Okay. I was still crying. But she did her best, and she made sure that you were fed. You know, she was your first experience of an Eisen woman, and largely the memory is of someone who was extremely severe, not unkind, just sharp.
Yep.
You still remember how you got into that slaughterhouse, you know, and there's like a little side basement entrance. It's lifted up, you know, and below it's nothing but cobwebs and candles, and looks like it's been abandoned. I would like you to make a perception and wits roll for me. Your perception being if you have the keen senses advantage, it gives you 2 extra unkept dice. Otherwise, it is just your wits.
Which would be, how do I do the rolling?
So in the Zoom chat, there should be a thing pinned. Replace the U in parentheses with your unkept dice, which it should just be your wits of 3, I believe, and the K in parentheses with a 3 also.
Okay. Rolling 3D6. Okay. Technical difficulties on my end. Please hold.
That's fine.
And then is it /R or R/?
So it should look like this. I just pinned it into the chat. Oh, sorry, with a K in front of the 3. Typo.
3. Okay, 3d10, exclamation points, K10. Or 3.
Like that. Sorry, I fixed it.
Okay, I think that's what I have.
Okay. Okay. Um, so the cobwebs are there, but the dust on the floor isn't as thick as it should be. This place is not only like has been used recently, but is still in use. But the entryway, the area that you're passing through, is designed to look very much abandoned. Does that make sense?
Yep.
There's another room that you kind of like pass through. It's familiar. It's all, like memories that are close to a decade old at this point, Um, you kind of remember this room as being like more frightening, and now it seems just a lot more like what could be spared. Does that make sense? And you also notice something that you didn't notice before when you were a child, which is like marks on the side of the door that aren't any language that you recognize. Like you can't read and write, so all symbols are symbols, but something is definitely like marking it on the inner door. And when you push it open, there's a familiar woman. She's just kind of like standing like she's been waiting. She probably heard you approach. You have, dresses that make noise and such. Um, but she's tall and she's sort of like gaunt and severe. She's the woman that you remember, but she's a decade older. Um, and she drops into fluent Fadachi, and she's like, Angelina. She's like, I don't know if you would remember me.
Of course I do.
Uh, she kind of gives a smile. Like there's a sort of like look of like, I'm not sure if I hug you. She's not like a hugging type of person, you know what I'm saying? But like she's willing to kind of like accede to the moment, sometimes call for it. But it's nothing to do with you. It's more just like that's just not really like
Mm-hmm.
she's not really like particularly touchy. Does that make sense?
Yes. And knowing her when she did, she probably wouldn't like even go for the hug because she knows like that's not what she does either. So
Yeah, when she sees that like it's not really going to be required, she kind of like puts her hand on your shoulder instead. You know what I'm saying? She's like, it's good to see you well. She says, I understand. She says the noble life didn't seem to quite work out for you.
no, the bad luck seemed to follow me wherever I went, and of course, families don't like bad luck.
She says they are quickly eager to be rid of an albatross.
Very much.
Um, I have no hold over you. You owe me no obligation. You never have. Your freedom from Vidachi was, I don't want to say paid for because there is no charge for it. She says, that includes a lack of obligation. She says, I am here to ask for your help.
Of course, anything.
She says, you heard the bells ringing this morning.
All day, I didn't know what they were for.
She says, the Iron Prince took a long step off of the Wachtturm.
Oh. Do we know why yet?
He was alone when it happened.
Interesting.
Says, and I know that he had drunk a great deal beforehand, but that's all I know at this point. What I do know is that complicates things here in Freiburg considerably.
It very much does.
I do not know that he had a will until this morning. Says, but he has bequeathed the barony, um, the the Konogreg. Which kind of switches back to Eisen for like the proper word because the measurements are different between the languages, right?
Yep.
To his scribe, says the person, she says, writing down his memoirs, his book.
Okay.
She says, I trust you met him.
I believe I did.
She says, good boy.
He seemed distraught that someone he cared about had died, and
I would think that it was more than just the care of a friend for a friend. I wouldn't know precisely what to call their relationship, but it was certainly more than just that.
I told him to listen to his friend and to try and follow whatever he was asked of.
No. He tempers that with some wisdom. Trog was not a particularly wise ruler, if he could be called a ruler at all. She says, I'm sorry, she says, we have not formally been introduced. I'm Wilma Probst. She says, I am also the city's administrator. Says, given that there were no taxes levied or laws passed, that may seem a strange position, but that is the one that I had, and I have done my best to keep things running here, keep the lights on, and the sewage from backing up for over 2 decades now. She says, it's afforded me the opportunity, she says, to get some people to safety. She says, there's an organization that I work with which does that. She says, for their protection and yours, she says, that's all I'm going to say on that. She says, but now we are in a position, she says, where chaos is imminent. The scribe is not only not constitutionally equipped to be an Iron Prince, I think he's even less equipped to be an Iron Prince in the manner that Trog was, which is to say, indifferent.
All right, how can I help?
There's a further complication you should be aware of. Logan is named Logan Seeger because he is the son of Eric Seeger, the Posen of Seeger lands. Which means that our neighbors will view Freeburg as having just been conquered by one of the southern Iron Princes, the formerly objectionist Iron Princes in Avadicine land.
All right, so more problems are coming.
More problems are most definitely coming. I fully expect that there will be wolves at our door in one manner or another soon.
All right, so packing up, moving again.
She says, I need you here. Says, the city is going to survive one way or another. She says, and I intend to see that it does. She says, what I could use is your sight.
All right.
She says, very specifically and very imminently, I would like people that are competent, trustworthy, or at least whose motivations can be understood to the degree that they can be predicted.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And hearing how serious this conversation is, Rosa will actually take off her mask.
And Wilma kind of pauses and she notes the scars, which are like new, I assume.
No, the scars came from when she was a kid.
Okay. Yeah, she kind of like moves her hand up and she, brushes her thumb over one. It's just like they've healed very well.
Better than expected.
She says, so that is my ask. She says, help me find those who can make a difference and have the will to.
I can do that.
She says, I will be at City Hall if you need anything. She says, you should drop by sometime later. She says, because I will make some accommodations for food, board, and payment while you are acting in my service. I understand that you need to eat.
I do thank you for that. As reading fortunes pays, just not as much as many other jobs do.
She kind of nods. She's like, it is good to see you. Okay.
And it is good to see you.
I must return to my post. She says, I've been waiting here for some time, and the city will fall to chaos without me on a normal day. And today is not a normal day.
There are so many nobles in fear right now. I would not be surprised if I could not make a buck today.
By all means, you might meet some interesting people. She says, but feel free to walk the city as well.
I just see cattail.
Yes, she's been very interested in what I'm doing.
With that, Rosa will put back on her mask and in the broken Eisen that she's been using. Senora, I'll let you go first.
She kind of nods. She says, very kind of you and not want to linger here a moment longer than my nose can allow.
Si, senora.
And, she pushes up through the exit and makes her way through city streets that no one is quite as familiar with as she is. All right. So that brings us to Runa, who is... The last 3 days have had you more conscious than you've been in some time. The first kind of day was just a little bit of a haze in which you remembered food and drink. Not much of like the quality of it, like it tasted vaguely of bread and maybe rainwater, maybe a few days older than rainwater. But almost as immediately your mind retreated and it went back. And it went back to things that were familiar. It went back to the prow of your mother's ship as it cut through the water and the coldest water that you remembered in your life, catching you from the spray as you headed to what your mother called the end of the world. It was as north as you've ever sailed, and the Vestons sailed pretty far. Even the hardiest crew members were like pulling their heavy cloaks out and wearing them. As you arrived at an island that was a mountain that just sort of jutted up to the sky. And your mother, who you have known to be fearless and unstoppable and savage and kind as she needed to be, looked up of it and then kind of took one knee and bowed her head, as did the rest of the crew. Just as this is the Rome Father's throne. Says, here at the end of the world, she says, and at the top of it, she says, you will become a Scaregem. And she kind of handed you like climbing spikes and furs, and gestured to kind of like where part of the mountain seemed to like curve inwards. She says, there at the seat of the throne. She says, but this part you must do yourself.
Is there anything I should prepare myself? Ugh. I should prepare. It's weird hearing my own voice, but
I get it.
is there anything I should prepare myself for?
He says, I truly cannot say. She says, what is revealed to every Scaregem is different. She says, but I know that what is revealed to you will set a course for your life.
Thank
He
you.
says, mine gave me purpose after my village was burned. She says, my family died. She says, it was not a purpose I was ready for then.
Well, I'm eager to find mine. Well,
Is it a bit too speech jammery?
Sorry. Is there anything I can do to help? Oh.
See if I have an adapter.
hey. Oh, this is better.
Okay. Joran, who is like the very cute Veston who's joined your ship fairly recently, is like, she doesn't have to climb the whole thing alone, right? I mean, look at her, she's a slip of a girl. Hey, oh, very pretty slip of a girl, mind, he says, but, and Ingvild just kind of like looks at him and she's like, she won't make it.
I'm tougher than I look.
She is Ingvild daughter. So I would like you to make two things, a brawn roll and a resolve roll.
Okay, I'll do the brawn roll first. Did anything show up? Or
It did not. Yeah, that button is broken,
Okay.
sadly.
how do I do the brawn roll?
So let's see, what is your brawn?
3.
Okay, so the same roll that I linked in the chat for Rosa is this one is gonna work for that.
Oh man. I'm gonna have to reconfigure things, but that's okay. And is it the exact?
Yeah.
Okay. $19.
And then go ahead and make the resolve roll, which will be the same thing except change all the 3s to 4s. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. Your resolve is also 3. So go
No,
ahead
it's
and.
not. It's
Oh, I'm looking at the wrong character sheet.
One moment. Am I able to invoke solitude?
Yes, you are able to invoke any rune that you would like.
All right, I would like to invoke my solitude rune.
Which I believe is a target number 15. I think you'll actually say on the rune.
The effect is it adds 2 unkept dice to resolve tests.
Okay, so it's a target number 15. So first you're going to roll that actual rune, keeping your resolve. So for this would be five, keep 4.
Okay, and the same format, 5 keep 4.
Yes.
$27.
Okay, so yeah, you take your knife, carve into your arm, sparks kind of burst out from where you've carved the runes before. Actually, it might not be your arm. Where did you say this particular rune was?
It is her inner arm. I'll show it on myself because that's a bit easier. Like here, right?
Okay.
Inner bicep.
Forearm,
Is that correct?
bicep. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where
Yeah.
it gets big when you flex. Like
This place is like, there's like a power to Scaregin that is always available. But this place is like trying to touch lightning when you're in a lightning storm. Does that make sense? It feels just like it's palpable and all around you. And so calling upon the rune, the sparks kind of normally like flitter out of your arm and are visible, but this time it's like they fly in every direction and you kind of almost have to turn your face away from it as you're carving it and do it from memory. But then go ahead and make the resolve roll as you move up.
Is that
So you'll get 2 extra dice on that. And if you had the athlete skill, I would let you add it as well, but
how do I put that in?
so it'll just be 6, keep 4. Is the,
Okay. $36.
yeah, destiny is upon you. You're like, here we go.
Destiny. Oh,
So
copyright.
the flesh wounds, like those are just from the cold of the place and climbing through it. But never once does your like resolve waver. There's times where, you know, like you just know that the best thing to keep your fingers and your toes, which are so cold from like getting frostbite, is to keep moving, to keep climbing, because it's forcing the blood through them, it's forcing your body to work, it's generating heat. And you push yourself up and over this area that's kind of like, you know, the mountainside has been carved to look like an enormous throne, and so this is like the seat of it as opposed to the height of it. And the one thing that had been given to you when you got up here was like a very small bag. You had no idea what was in it, but it was just part of the process, right? And you see a very old crone sitting in front of a campfire that just looks up with sightless eyes and kind of like, well, have you brought me dinner then?
Can you
So
no,
up.
for the headphones? Up for the headphones. Could you repeat that?
So there's a sightless old crone that's sitting on the throne, or in like the flat area that is the throne. Like it's much larger than just like a space for her. It's a throne large enough to be visible from the water side. And she's sitting in front of a campfire. She looks up, her eyes are completely sightless, but she still sort of like locks on you. And she says, "Did you bring my dinner then?" And she kind of gestures to a pouch that was given to you at the like the very bottom of it.
Yes. And I'll hand it to her.
And she kind of like opens up. There's like some very typical Vestan like seafarer inside of it, you know what I'm saying? And she starts pouring some things into little cups of water. Like it's a almost absurdly normal kind of preparation of dinner, for the fact that when you look in another direction, you can see the entire northern seas of the Vestan Isles and realize how high you are, you know, and how much the cold should be just like cutting into you here.
When I'm looking around, is the ship still here?
Yeah, you can see it way down at the bottom.
Okay.
It looks real small. You're really glad that like while you were doing the climb, you didn't like look down at it.
Mhm. But she smiles to herself seeing it now.
Yeah, and you smell like the smell of like the food coming, and um she says, "You should know that it is the living runes that show you what you are to see." She says, "Not me." She says, "I'm just a caretaker of this place." She says, "I cannot predict what you will see." She says, "I cannot control what you will see." She says, "That is for destiny itself to shape."
I understand.
And she takes the canteen that was in like the little collection of water, and she pours it into the most obscure little divot in the rock. Like it's just, you wouldn't have taken it because there's no shaping to it to show this is the important spot. It's just like an area where the stone has been carved out and ice kind of coats the underside of it. And you see it start to fill. And that you can kind of tell, like, as it fills, it's already showing images other than the stone that's below. You're just catching kind of like flashes of it, of gray hair, of like knives, and none of it makes sense. And she kind of, you know, she puts one hand on your shoulder and she says, "I know you are eager to begin." She says, "Your life will be different after this." She says, "So make peace with what you have had."
Yeah, I have.
She says, "Then look."
And I will.
So it creates an image before you. You've used, the gateway rune before to kind of look on things, and so it's a natural process for you to just sort of like lose all sense of self and ego and kind of go into the moment and what you're seeing. And you see a man with a brown beard kind of like running through the streets outside of Kirk. Kirk is like the capital of the Vendorlands. And he stumbles. This is an island that once belonged to the Vestin. And he kind of like falls to his knees before a spring. And you can see him scream inaudibly. And he reaches for the dagger at his side. Just real quick, I'm gonna do an eye horror trigger warning for anybody that's in the audience. So he takes it and he just turns and like puts his knife into his own eye and then pulls free and seems to have a look of just sort of like shock that like he's not an act, he's not screaming, and he lets it fall into the water that's before him. And you kind of see for a moment like a spectral eye appears inside of his. And then his head throws back and his screaming is silent, but as he screams, you see ghosts appearing around him. You see Vestin of ages past gathering around him, and you know suddenly what it is that you're witnessing. The Vestin do not have leaders, great leaders that rule all the Vestin lands except in times of great duress. A high king is sometimes called by Otis himself and given the wisdom of a god. And he is marked amongst those who know him for his single eye. And you watch as gray starts to trace through the man's beard and through his hair, and he kind of rises and he's shaky, and you see he kind of like quickly pulls a cloak over himself and a hood up and just sort of like moves away as fast as he can. And then suddenly the image is changing, and you're seeing a city that is not like any city that you've seen firsthand before. You see full thatched buildings, which are kind of like the German Middle Renaissance period, where it's like whitewashed plaster and full timber, and then like shingle or thatch rooftops. Oh, sorry, what's going on, Kevin? Okay, good. Okay, gathered around an enormous tower of bone that rises up uh, from the middle of the city. That tower extends a few hundred feet into the sky. And it looks down over the rest of the city. And in a moment, you see cracks begin to go up the base of it. You begin to see fissures that are moving through the whole thing. And then in a moment, you see it splinter into like tens of thousands of parts. And as it does, you watch as the world that you are seeing seems to fold in on itself as identical worlds of slightly different like color. Like one is like darker and deeper shadows, and another one has like a really vibrant, almost pastel palette to it. They all fold upon the same world. And in the process of doing so, it seems like they are destroying parts of one another. You see this, and you see in the middle of this kind of like folding and collision of different energies, you see a single old man with like a walking stick, bent, a deep hood. He's different than the one that you saw that carved out his own eye. You see he has two eyes, but they're completely white with cataract. And as you're looking at him, he turns and looks directly at you in the middle of this vision and prophecy. He looks straight back at you, and then he reaches and touches your chest. And that's the last thing you remember for 4 years. You come to in a dungeon from that moment. You're being kind of like given water and food by hand, and like you don't even have to speak his language to understand by the tone of the person speaking to you that he's kind of like the village moron. Does that make sense? He's just sort of patting you on the shoulder and like giving you like a good job, you're eating food, like very proud of you. You don't understand a word of what he's saying. It's just like that's what you get from the tone. Does that make sense? And you have shackles on ankles and wrists, and then time kind of seems to blur as if you're getting used to even experiencing it again.
I
Go ahead.
Silly of me for not taking that rune.
Which rune?
You know, the one where I can just.
Oh, slip out of shackles?
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed you didn't have that one.
I was like, I won't need this till later.
Surely not. You come to again, and you are on an auction block, which is something that you had seen, before, because in Vestin's old times, when they kept thralls and stuff like that, they occasionally moved them on them. Does that make sense? This is a different one, and it's underground, and it's something being conducted in secret. You see a very handsome man with eyes and features standing before a crowd of mixed nationalities. You see Montaigne, you see Eisen, you see Vendel, like holding up signs as the man talks, and it's like a distant sort of understanding that you're being bid on. And like the real kind of like big strapping village idiot, like the first time you move, it kind of like squeezes your shoulder. And you have every possibility that you could like summon lightning, try to fight your way out of this. You're still in shackles. You don't exactly know how shackles mixes with lightning, and you also have to find something sharp to carve on yourself.
And the rune's on my wrist.
Oh, so it's completely covered.
Unless her, like, she has feminine arms, like she has muscle, but like.
She also has not eaten well in quite a while. So if you want
Yeah.
to try a finesse roll, I will let you make if you have the criminal knack, let you add that to it.
Did I have
Sorry,
points
I'm not
for
meaning
that?
to tease you, but so go ahead and roll 3k3 for your, or is it 3k3 or 2k2 for your finesse?
2.
Okay. Oh, I will also let you make a resolve roll if you would instead like to take 15 flesh wounds and break a thumb to do it.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
rather use resolve. So that would be 4k4, right?
Yep.
Okay. A lot better than 2. 29.
Oh, I almost forgot. So I made a whole image to share with you and everything. So yeah, breaking your thumb is not an issue for you. That is the man in your vision.
Interesting.
Yeah, you managed to break your thumb. That isn't the hard part. You even managed to like hide your features so that nobody can tell that you've done it. Get the shackle at least down enough that you'll have access to the rune. You see, it looks like you're being bid on the heaviest by an elderly Vendel, one who looks in his 50s. You would certainly most likely have a much easier time like with a single person as opposed to this entire room, which is filled with guards and the like. Do you want to play along or do you just want to go fighting?
I'm going to play along for now.
Okay. You don't really have a concept of how much Gilder is worth because Gilder is anathema to Vestin. They refuse to be paid in it. They refuse to use it. They burn it when they find it. It's an abomination as far as they're concerned. Not for any particular like good religious reason. It's just sort of emblematic of a thing that they hate because for them, half of their countrymen were corrupted by it. So, you see the man kind of like he puts up a bid and like nobody else seems to challenge. Somebody makes a comment. Oh wait, you don't speak much Eisen yet, right? You didn't buy any
No.
language, so you have like the acquaintance with Eisen, but I'm actually
She
gonna
doesn't
like say
even know
that's
how
gonna.
she got here.
Yeah,
Like she doesn't know what has happened.
Your familiarity with Eisen is sort of almost by virtue of things that you've absorbed from the subconsciousness, because you've been here for some time. Does that make sense? Unfortunately, the only person who really talked to you regularly was not terribly bright. And he, the vendor man who has purchased you, he's skinny, you know, he's well dressed. He looks like a merchant, but doesn't look like a man who could like do much in the way of like physically endangering you. Like you see he's got a pistol, but he doesn't carry a knife or an axe or broadsword or anything, you know, you would consider much of a weapon. Beyond the pistol, you do consider that a weapon, like Western are not idiots. But he kind of, you see, like most people who have made a purchase are kind of like lingering, but he is quickly sort of moving towards the door. And there's a guard keeper that's at the door that leads out to like wherever the heck you are. And he's like, well, I can't take her out there in chains. He says, there's no laws in Freiburg. He says, there's a professional reputation to consider. He says, free her. And he kind of, you know, the guard kind of like, your folly, he says. Usually he says, I'd give him a few weeks, he says, whipping to break him in first. But he does as the man requests, and he like undoes the shackles in your hands, and he kneels down to like undo the shackles in your wrists.
Did I just break my thumb, or am I out?
I'm gonna
on
give
arm?
it to you as a dislocation instead of a full break.
Oh, yeah.
Just to be nice. You didn't actually encourage her. Actually, here, do this for me. Roll your brawn real quick. Get over 15, and then it'll just be dislocated.
Okay. Are we sure we don't want to do resolve?
I'm sure.
I'm kidding.
But I respect
know.
the hustle. I absolutely respect the hustle.
I didn't.
You didn't?
I didn't do that. I didn't do the thing you
No.
told me to. Oops. That's a 12.
Yeah, you pulled harder than you meant to. You're fairly sure you have a traumatic wound now, but it's going to be a relatively small one that I know you have the ability to heal that fairly quickly, so I'm not too worried
I
about
think
it.
the healing is temporary, but I do, yes.
I think you have the ability to get rid of the effects of one traumatic wound, and so for this, given I feel a little bit mean, but
No, don't. I'm having a good time.
All right, good. So he
For the duration of the rune's effect is for invoke,
okay.
but still.
Okay. So yeah, it'll still be there. You have a dramatic wound at the moment, but getting rid
Yeah.
of one is not too hard.
Yeah.
It's when you're crippled that it becomes a problem. Crippled is half your resolve. So
Oh no.
he and the Vendel kind of he looks to you, and he kind of he rubs at his chest for a moment, and he says, I know, he says, you must crave freedom like a fish craves water. He says, and this is kind of like outside of like the door of like where the guard was. He says, I would understand, he says, if you took a knife to my gut. He says, but I ask, he says, for a moment's patience.
She like lowers her, like she's kind of like was readying herself for the right moment, because she's been, you know, her body hasn't been getting, you know, the necessary care. Her nails are probably pretty sharp over her arm, and she kind of just has her arms by her side, and listening,
So
but also confused.
So the first thing when you kind of go outside, you're like right on a riverfront. Does that make sense? Like you actually have to take some stairs back up to be like topside. Wherever you went into was built beneath the street level.
This is
it
my
was
first time seeing the outside.
in some time.
Correct.
And also, you see that there's a massive bone tower that dominates over the city. It's the easiest landmark in all of Freiburg. You also know it's far inland to Eisen.
She's kind of just stunned for a moment because she recognizes it vividly from the vision.
Says, it is not my intent, he says, to keep you captive. And he takes money and he kind of like moves towards one of like the closest stalls and he just they give him like a little plate that looks like it's got sliced sausages and fries covered with some sort of spicy ketchup. You've never seen it before. It's not Vendel food. Smells delicious. He just sort of like offers it over to you. There's no silverware of any kind. This is just like a stuff it in your face as fast as you want to kind of meal. And you still I'm like literally buy it from a merchant. You know what I'm saying? Like a little cart vendor. So odds of it being poisoned or something is remote.
Thank you.
It says a woman, he says, many years ago, he says, a captain of a ship, he says, spared my life. I was a crew member, he says, aboard it. He says, thinking I would make my fortune as a sailor. Says the rest of the crew, he says, perished at the hands of hers. But when it came time, he says, her blade to my neck, she looked into my face, he says, and chose to spare me. Says, you wear her face.
I was about to ask why you'd spend so much.
Says,
I assume.
I have had a life because of that choice that she made. Says, I learned I was not a sailor. I found I am good at fixing clocks. Says, there are far less pirates. He says, and raiders.
Thank you. And she is confused. This feels profound. And everything has kind of been a blur up until this point.
3 years ago, he says, I heard of the tale of the sinking of the Revenge, which is your mother's ship. He says that its crew, says, were taken by slavers. Says that its captain did not survive.
Wrong time.
I didn't clear my throat. I'm gonna like cough into the mic. Calm down. Kidding.
And like tears are starting to well up.
He gently puts a hand on her shoulder, like keenly aware that she might have every reason to still decide to like stab him. And he kind of like, he says, my home does not far. He says, my home is not far. He says, you're welcome as a guest.
I have nothing. I would appreciate it.
And he turns and walks with you, and I'm going to cut for there. Gerard, you are in a place called the House of Stone. It is a fine, fine might be a bit of an exaggeration. It's a decent inn for Freiburg. In Montaigne, it would the nobles would turn up their noses and sneer at it. You've fallen from gentry to gentry without much in the way of money, if I understand correctly, right?
Correct.
Which, by most people's definition of gentry, is not really gentry. It's somebody trading on their name and their name alone. Those hard times have, you've salved the bleeding as much as possible, but there were members of your family that were not so responsible with money and frittered away the last guilders that the family had perhaps a year ago. It's been a long, slow decline, but Montaigne is a bloodthirsty place where the Guilder is concerned right now, with nobles trying to shore up their influence, gentry just trying to find a place, and all of it happening in the battlefield of the courts. On that battlefield, the Sissies do Sissies family has become a power. A long time ago, you were betrothed into them. And there's a heartbreak that will come about later. But in the wake of that heartbreak, 3 weeks ago, you were invited to the court of the Lady Shabasis to Sissies, her private home, not proper court. It is a summons from like a full, noble baroness. And it is a summon to probably one of the creepiest parts of Montaigne lands, because Sissies do Sissies lands are inside the Schwarzenwalden. Black trees and unknown monsters are supposedly filling the woods, but their estate is within the view of a particularly beautiful fountain that looks like it's singing, and at night sometimes it sounds like it is, or at least the imagination can make the way the wind blows through it sound like song. Most of the Sissies to Sissies family are happy to be anywhere else in the world than in Sissies to Sissies lands, but Jamay seems to enjoy it. And when you're called upon and summoned, arrive, it's actually to the not the foyer, like the reading room, the conservatory of their estate, where she is surrounded by dozens of books. Not quite in the full court garb that you glanced and seen her in like once or twice in your career in Montaigne, but much more casually dressed. And she rises, offers her hand. She says, "May the servants get you anything?"
No, madam.
She says, "Well, I have some tea stew." She says, "Would you mind a cup?"
It would be a pleasure.
She sits. This is one of the most beautiful women in the court. And also considered one of the most dangerous in her own way. I mean, her ability to destroy a reputation over the course of an evening is well documented and well known. But like that said, that terrible power, she actually has a fairly kind reputation amongst her own family. She's never once like turned her tongue upon her own family. She's largely used it as a protective measure. And she kind of like regards you for some long moments, and she says, "I know that there were promises exchanged when you and my niece were children." She says, "and that circumstances have conspired that those promises were not kept." She says, "I know this to be," she says, "likely a painful subject for you."
A matter of the past, my lady.
She says, "I do not know what the future holds for the Sissies to Sissies, and I also know that of late, the Emperor is growing somewhat less amused by his favorite wit." She says, "There are securities that I must make now before I lose the opportunity." She says, and so she says, "It was my approval," she says, "that granted," she says, the marriage of my niece." She says, "While she holds responsibility," she says, "because she is a noble woman and she will always choose to do so." She says, "She would not have done so without my request."
I understand, my lady.
She says, your understanding, she says, is a debt that I hope to repay one day. She says, I understand that your circumstances are somewhat less auspicious now than they have been in the past.
Such are the rise and falls of the court.
Sorry, can you say that again? I'm having a little bit of a hard time.
Such are the rise and the falls of the court.
She says, anyone foolish enough to think that the mercies of the court, she says, will smile on one person forever, deserves the fate that comes to them. She says, I cannot promise you, she says, that I can reverse the course of your fortunes, she says, but it falls to me at least, she says, to help tend to them in the meantime. She says, and there is a particularly delicate matter, she says, that I would like you to look into on my behalf. She says, go ahead.
I'm intrigued, my lady.
She says, I'm grabbing a name real quick. Sorry, one sec. She says, the gentleman Kirsch, she says, that Charlotte is married to, says, he has landed. She says, he also has a number of investments in different opportunities throughout Eisen. I have some concerns about some of those. She says, many of them centered in Freiburg. She says, and I am wondering, she says, if you could be persuaded to make a formal report on them to me. She says, discreetly.
Of course, my lady.
And you know full well that asking very specifically the ex-jilted lover of a noble that's already married, she's asking you to look into, you know, her husband, her niece's husband's affairs, and likely banking on a certain amount of personal animosity for it.
It is a strange request to be true, but I am hardly in the position to refuse.
She says, I will make sure, she says, to care for your needs, she says, while you're in Freiburg. She says, and there is another matter there as well. She says, that of another niece of mine. She says, she too is in the position of having had an engagement recently broken off. She says, perhaps the wheel of fortune, she says, turning upon us, she says, for breaking another engagement that was promised. She says, I also suspect it has a bit more to do with the Emperor's disfavor. I would like to send you to Freiburg, she says, with enough money to purchase a proper home, one that she will be able to reside in while taking suitors from Eisen. She says, it is a good sum of money, she says, and I understand if you would choose to take this opportunity to consider another matter settled between us, she says, but if you use it for the purpose, she says, that it is intended for, she says, and if you remain in my good faith and maintain your honor, she says, I think there will be other opportunities. She says, social and financial.
It'd be my pleasure to be of assistance to you, my lady. I am hardly a rogue or a scoundrel to make off with well-intended gilders.
Sorry, can you say that sentence again? I'm having a hard time.
I am hardly a rogue or a scoundrel to take off with honestly earned gilders.
She says, that is the reputation that was born to me. She says, I've made some travel arrangements. She says, I understand it is extremely unwise to stop in the Schwartz and Walden by night. She says, so it will depart at first morning, she says, and it may take off at a more vigorous clip than you are used to from a carriage. But I understand this to be the local convention, and well, we've lost a few carriages before, so I am adhering to it.
I'm certain there should be some risk going to the Schwartz and Walden, but please rest assured that I would not have graduated from the academy if I were not skilled with my blade.
We have seen a number of extremely skilled swordsmen disappear into the Schwartz and Walden.
Then let us pray that I am not the last.
She says, I would say stay with the carriage, travel as quickly as you can. The carriage does depart in the morning, and with it, you are given a valise that is full of 10,000 guilder to be used for the purchase of a home in Freiburg, one suitable for a woman of stature.
Of course.
It's, you know, it's like probably as much money as you had like as a gentry to like, this should set you up for your entire life. Does that make sense?
It does, and it will be guarded with my life.
It's an enormous show of trust from Lady Shimei, and probably the most convincing part of that, she really is willing to like try to work something out between the two of you. That it's not just, you know, like, you know, the Sissies to Sissies family is wealthy, but not like rolling in it. Does that make sense?
They were wealthy enough to purchase a barony.
Yes, but that cost, and you know, the emperor does not sell them cheaply.
No, and it's only been a short amount of time, so this is a large investment.
Yes, and a considerable amount of trust, of genuine trust. Being careful, I assume, as you arrived in Freiburg. You know, there were like a number of different places to stay. The particular area that you're staying is the one that you came to understand was like relatively safe for nobles, like free of criminal activity and stuff like that. It's an area of the city that's referred to as the playground. And that is because it is where the largest finishing school in all of Eisen is located. The Brutsman School for Young Nobles is just outside of the House of Stone, the inn that you have come to find yourself. The House of Stone itself is run by a very colorful innkeeper who tells a ghost story about the Scotten man every night. And as he comes to the conclusion of that ghost story, he pours a bucket of water over the fire and plunges the entire tavern into darkness and lets all of the guests find their way to the rooms in the dark after getting over the screams. It's what's that?
A bit of a showman.
Absolutely, and with a certain like dark flair that's probably only really appreciated in Eisen. It's called the House of Stone for a reason. It's very secured. And in the morning, you have a meeting with the person who recommended the place to you, which is your friend on the watch command. He does not command this section of the city. In point of fact, when asked about where you should stay, he said not his section of the city. But when you come down for breakfast in the morning with your valise secured in the safe that's in your room and everything, your friend, Adrian, is there. Adrian has put on some weight since you last seen him, and he's put on some gray as well. The scars are the same. He's had those for quite some time. He still has his Panzer hand and a the most beat up broadsword that you have ever seen still hangs at his side. You thought for sure that that was something that was due to be replaced, but apparently, if something works well, Adrian is not keen to replace it.
Guten Tag, my,
What's that?
Guten Tag, my friend.
It says, Guten Tag, good morning. He says, I have breakfast for us already. And you see there's like ale at the tables, nothing else but ale yet.
A hearty breakfast to start, for sure.
He says, if you need, he says something else. He says, everything here is good. He says, I'm reasonable. He says, did I not steer you right? He says, is this not a fine place?
It is a very fine place, my friend.
Um,
Perhaps you can help me with another matter as well. I am seeking a home here for a noblewoman.
oh, he says, a torrid affair? He says, or just a business dealing?
Business dealing. You know me better than that, my friend.
He says, I understand. He says, Montero, all about the chivalry. He says, some proper courting. He says, in Eisen, he says, we do things properly.
And of course, the finishing school across the street is a nice touch.
Um, he says, oh yeah, he says, the only Jennies, he says, in this entire district have to pretend they're not. He says, one of two places in Freeburg where that is true.
Merci.
Um, he kind of smiles. He says, I would have put you up, he says, I would have put you up in finer herd, he says, but I could not guarantee that you would not be robbed blind by morning. Says, and the only place, he says, where your things would be safe is the greener leaves. He says, it's a nice place, he says, but it is pricey. He says, and I've seen the accommodations you stayed in pay.
Well, pay was a whole other situation. But this will do until I can find my lady proper place to stay.
He says, well, he says, there are two places. He says, I think, he says, you would be wise to look. He says, I suppose, he says, somewhere around here, he says, would not be so bad either. He says, but she would be surrounded, he says, by young men at their lessons and likely harassed, he says, on every walk through the city. He says, he says, there's Stein de Weissen. He says, that is across the city. He says, on the other side. He says, you can get all the finest things there. He says, fine wine, fine cigars. He says, fine company. He says, well, that would probably not interest her. He says, and the other place, he says, as strange as it may sound, is the riverfront. He says, that is an exciting place. He says, there is plenty of action. He says, both for nobles, he says, and for commoners, he says, like us. Oh, I forgot, you are a nobleman. He kind of like thumps the table like.
We will seek in both places and find which will make the lady most comfortable. I should not presume what her desires are.
He says, well, the riverfront is ever an exciting place. Says, and he says, plenty of entertainment to keep you busy. He says, so you wait for the lady to show herself.
Business first, pleasure later.
He says, when is your lady arriving?
I've not been advised of that yet.
He says, well, he says, when she arrives, he says, let me know. He says, I'll be happy to buy her a drink.
I'll be happy to introduce you.
He says, I might have to, he says, shake down, he says, a few of the troublemakers in my district first, he says, but that's the life of the Freeburg Guard.
Well, if you need some help with a rough customer or two, my blade is always at your service.
He says, well, he says, if you wish to put it to some service, he says, the Swordsman Guild, he says, is not far, he says, in the Steinhold, he says, but he says you might have some trouble getting into there today.
Oh,
He kind of gestures and says, if you haven't heard the damn bell ringing, he says, apparently, he says, the Iron Prince, has decided to go for a long walk over a short step.
the Iron Prince.
He says, Trog, he says, the old fool.
I know who you speak, but curious.
He decided that being rich and single, he says, was too much burden for one man to bear.
I do not presume to know the minds of men when they are alive, let alone when they're dead.
He says, I don't much know either. He says, from all I heard, he says he was a coward and threw down his sword at the battle, he says, and somehow ended up an Iron Prince. Says, maybe if I'd learned that lesson, he says, I'd have been rich a long time ago. He says, except I kept holding on to mine and fighting the men I needed to kill.
Well, perhaps that was the problem, and you were killing the men who would give you the money not to kill them.
I've learned a lesson in my old age. He says, I know to point my sword at them and ask for money first. He says, and it's legal. He says, because of this. He pats like the badge that marks him as Freeburg Guard.
Almost as good as being a member of the guild.
Oh no, he says the guild is much worse, he says, I've come to find. He says, for one thing, you're usually fighting men who actually know how to fight.
Ah, but see, my son, that is the joy of it. That thrill of putting your own life in danger.
Oh, sure, when you're young and handsome and a Montaigne, he says, you get to a duel, he says, and have a good time. He says, when you're an old, he says, slow Eisen, he says, it is a different story. He says, I got to get stabbed 5 or 6 times before I've grabbed you and beaten your head in enough, he says, to be declared a winner. There's no joy in that.
You would have thought that after the last time I had taught you better to not get stabbed the 4 or 5 times first.
He kind of like sighs reluctantly, like, signals the barkeep for like another round of breakfast. He says, I do need to get back though. He says, the guards, he says, are not at their posts unless their watch commander is at his.
Of course, my son.
And he takes, the breakfast and he kind of downs the ale again, and he kind of like, as long as you are in Freeburg, he says, your breakfasts are on me. He says, I will not take an argument about it.
I will not argue with that, but if your breakfasts are on you, how shall I eat?
He kind of laughs, and he just like throws some coins to the barman. And he says, take care of him. He says, whatever he asks. You see the bartender kind of like, I'll start a tab. And
Mademoiselle, what does
he strides out after that. And we are a little, we're at 9 o'clock now, and I think we're at a good point to kind of like resolve things or to wrap up for the night, especially because I'm trying to like not end on a cliffhanger. So I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. I had a great time running tonight. I'm sorry if it was a little like heavy narrative and not quite as much interaction. I do have plans to bring everybody together in the next game. Let's see. I feel like I'm missing something. I know I need to do an outro, but beyond that. Does everybody want to put their socials into the chat one more time? For those who are ready with them. All right. Well, I just wanted to say thanks everybody for coming out for this first episode. There are a lot of plans in the works for what's to come. I really enjoyed running this. I hope you guys enjoyed as well. And we will see you next time. Thank you, everyone. And as Kevin says, be kind to one another. And we will see you next week.
Good night.
Night, y'all.